Hey guys, glad to see you all here again. So I think at this point we all know that the Magic Keyboard is probably the go-to keyboard case for iPad Pro. It's obviously got that ridiculous price tag to it, $300 for the 11-inch and $350 for the 12.9-inch, so I can't really blame people if they want to find cheaper alternatives. But honestly, I can't say I found better ones, and a lot of other reviewers agree with me. So I had to get one for my own iPad Pro, and having used it rigorously for about 3 months now, I'd say, I have a few things to say. And I'm just going to quickly skim over the positives and focus mainly on the complaints and, potential improvements, because I'm sure you've seen other reviews that, just compliment and praise this keyboard. So I hope this video is a bit of a fresh one for you guys, and, let's jump into it. So starting off with what I particularly like about this case, I want to talk to you about the awesome build quality. So it's super sturdy everywhere, and the base doesn't flex at all, unlike a lot of other tablet keyboards. This just makes it really easy to balance, especially on your lap. And honestly, I just think that the build quality in general is just really fantastic. And it's definitely a significant improvement over the Folio keyboard. Like, if I were to recommend a keyboard out of the two, with pricing consideration, I would definitely recommend this keyboard. Also, touch and feel in general is genuinely amazing. Like, the keys are precise, make satisfying clicks, as you can hear, and it's honestly just like a laptop, because, they're the same scissor switch keys that are found on MacBooks. Additionally, the rubbery silicone material, which is this sort of grey material, is very satisfying to touch. What I mean by that is basically it's really sturdy, and it's quite hefty as well. But it's got this dense sort of feel, but it's equally soft. So basically, whenever you feel it, you can tell it's really dense. But at the same time, your fingers glide across it, and it's a really, really nice feel. So the trackpad, likewise, is honestly really well built. It's solid, and the diving board design suits the keyboard pretty well, actually. And I find that although it is rather small, and definitely smaller than, what you might think from looking at pictures or reviews online, the software makes up for it with a quite high sensitivity default cursor speed. So what I mean by that is, out of the box, the cursor speed is really, really fast, and it just flies across the screen. And also, this is a really, really satisfying movement. Also, I don't actually have to move as much because of this trackpad, to get from one place of the screen to the other, which is definitely a plus. So small details as well enhance the experience quite a bit. So the backlight adjusts its own brightness with the iPad sensors, and I feel like this is done pretty well. This kind of makes up for the lack of function keys, which many people are complaining about because they expected them to be there, but obviously they're not. But I feel like, yes, in certain conditions where maybe you're watching a movie in the dark and you want to turn that off, it's a bit of a hassle. But genuinely, for me, I've never had a problem with it, honestly. And the dimming and brightening of it, in sort of normal usage is spot on. Also, I think this subdued lime green light on the auto capitalization button is, I gotta hand it to Apple, it's really, really well done. Okay, so it doesn't jump out at you by being sort of particularly obtrusive or bright, but it's still noticeable enough, right? It's still noticeable enough to tell you everything you need to know, which is whether or not your caps lock is on or off. And in terms of overall experience, it's just a really, really fun case because of the dual hinge. Okay, so with a laptop, you have a single pivotal point, right? So that's kind of boring. But with two hinges, it's really satisfying, and honestly, just to hear these two clicks, can you hear that? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But basically, just to have these two hinges is really, really nice. So, what are my main complaints about it? Let's start with the build-related ones first. Okay, so the rubbery material that I talked about before is actually super easy to get dust and dirt on. And basically anything that gets on it, whether it's water stains or dust or whatever, it's really noticeable because it's just single grey colour, which just makes it stand out a lot. I find that if you want to keep your case looking clean and premium, you have to give it a quick clean or smudge with the fingers or the cloth, maybe once in a while, like multiple times a day if you use it often. So it's quite annoying, I would say. It's also really easy to make a scratch because it's sort of soft and also smooth, which just outlines the sacrifice that Apple had to make it sort of feel satisfying to touch. As you can expect, rubber is rubber, and rubber makes a mark really easily. Also, the second hinge doesn't go back very much. So a lot of reviews say that it goes back just enough for normal use, like maybe on a desk or something, where the user is sort of sitting up straight, hands perpendicular to their chest or whatever, right? But Personally, I don't think this is enough. Because for me, what makes the iPad unique is how maneuverable and versatile it is. So, often when you're lying down with the iPad on your chest or in some other quirky position, right? The hinge isn't nearly enough. And in my opinion, it's honestly just feels restricting, and it's probably my main complaint about it. Because when you buy it, it's definitely what you'll notice the most, well, if you use it for a while. Talking about hinges and pivotal movement, it's actually quite hard to open it up. So without the actual iPad in the case, there's this natural indentation in it, like a normal laptop. So basically it's really easy to put your fingers into it and prise it open. But once you put the actual iPad in there, it becomes fiddly and difficult to open. So what you have to do is you have to put your fingers sort of on the sides and push and pull at the same time. So what you do is you pull upwards, but also push downwards. And once you're there, you slip your thumbs underneath it and complete the process. So as you can tell, this whole process is very complicated, and it's a lot more complicated than a normal laptop. Actually, a good way to fix this that I saw in Max Tech's video, so shout out to him, is basically to prop it up vertically on the hinge, like this, so it becomes really easy to put your fingers on the side, and to pull down the bottom half, which is lighter, and yeah, from there you can just pull your iPad into the normal position. But either way is just a hassle, and even though I understand there's a compromise between sturdiness in the bottom section and ease of use, I still feel like Apple could have designed maybe a small indented area where my fingers can at least latch on and open the case. Moving on to software, the keyboard shortcuts that I'm used to on Windows can't be replicated here because it doesn't support a lot of third-party apps. And no, I don't mean like having to Command-C instead of Control-C to copy because, well, that's a no-brainer with switching from Windows to Mac. Like, I don't mind alternative shortcuts that I'm already used to. But it's things like pressing J or L to skip 10 seconds or go back 10 seconds on YouTube that don't actually work. I use YouTube quite a lot, so I'm just going to use YouTube as an example. But trust me, there are tons of other apps that don't actually work with the shortcuts. Actually, I do have a problem with YouTube on iOS in general. So many features like picture-in-picture mode don't actually work for the native app, even though it clearly does for Safari. And I'm honestly not going to switch to using Safari YouTube because frankly the UI sucks and, the web version just looks trash compared to the actual app version. Now, with the Magic Keyboard, spacebar doesn't actually work when you want to play and pause. And furthermore, obviously I mentioned J or L or even the arrow keys. So I actually have to lean forward and tap the screen, which obviously adds hassle and ruins the whole viewing experience. Look, I know these are all first world problems, and, they're pretty small and minor, but, as a tech reviewer, I gotta report what I noticed. And, well, I noticed this a lot. And finally, here's two nitpicks that I have that I don't actually think is Apple's fault. And trust me, I want to blame them as much as possible. So in order to create this sort of balanced keyboard, where most of the weight is actually concentrated on the top in the actual iPad, basically the bottom has to be adequately hefty to counteract top heaviness, right? So paired with that, and along with the solid hinges, by the way, which I'm seriously not complaining about because they're really stiff, so they feel really good and premium, the combined weight is actually heavier than the iPad itself. This didn't actually feel like much of a problem at first, but after a while the maneuverable and light element of the iPad completely goes away. I now associate my encased iPad with a lot more heftiness and mass, so it no longer appeals to me as a sort of the more portable alternative to a 13-inch laptop. And trust me, this is all about brain games here, because Apple has tried and tried again to make the iPad a bridge between the more portable iPhones and their Macs. Clearly, they value portability. Okay, final thoughts. So I feel like the Magic Keyboard is extremely good, like really good. The overall experience is genuinely fantastic, and I gotta hand it to Apple for creating such a seamless accessory. But did I really need those initial unique features like the trackpad or the floating iPad? Well, kinda. Here's what I mean by that. So the hype really died down quick for me. For one, the amount of elevation between the bottom frame and the iPad really isn't actually that much. In fact, I was actually disappointed that it didn't, float enough. It barely looks any different than if it were touching the base because basically there's no lighting behind the iPad, so the shadow kind of hides the floatiness, if you get what I mean. But I got to admit that the additional closeness to my face really makes up for this. Basically, the fact that the first hinge is actually angled towards me instead of away from me places the display closer than a typical single-hinge laptop screen. And I think that the extra intimacy becomes really useful at times. And the trackpad as well, actually. I'm not a big fan of laptop trackpads anyway, because I much prefer mice, so I didn't really find much value in using this one as something that actually replaces my fingers on the screen. For example, selecting text, right? So if you want to select text on the iPad with the trackpad, what you have to do is you have to use your finger and actually drag. Now, because the trackpad is so small, it's quite difficult to do, and I find that it becomes quite fiddly, and I much prefer using my fingers, basically. And because of this, I don't really use the trackpad for this. However, I am a massive fan of gestures, like how you swipe up with 3 fingers to go home or switch between tabs on this trackpad. And because of how close your trackpad is to you compared to your screen, it actually makes it really easy to do whatever it is you need to do to navigate. And also just the fact that it's so small and yet commands such a large area of screen just makes it really, really nice. And I feel like just this one single usage is enough to justify getting a keyboard with it. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the Magic Keyboard. Okay, look, I'm not here to answer the world-shattering question of whether or not this iPad Pro setup is a true replacement of the MacBook. Because frankly, it is not. The OS and the UI are still too phone-like, or rather iPad-like, so true multitasking is primitive compared to on a laptop. Instead, I wanted you to know my honest thoughts on using this keyboard for a few months. Because, let's be real, you're only going to buy this if you already have an iPad and want to improve your experience. So, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!